Ever feel like you're just kind of wandering through life after a big change? Like someone swapped out the map for a treasure hunt, but you never actually signed up for it.
Oh, absolutely. That feeling of being lost. And it's not always about heartbreak.
Yeah, though breakups can definitely be up there on the list of things that kind of shake up who we thought we were.
It's the human experience of loss, really, when you get down to it. Loss of a job, a dream, a routine, even a relationship. They can all leave us feeling unmoored.
Right, like stepping off a moving train.
Yeah.
And suddenly you have to find your footing in this totally new landscape. Unsettling, for sure, but maybe also exciting.
Definitely both.
And that's actually what we're diving into today. How finding yourself after a loss isn't just about picking up the pieces. It can be about discovering a whole new wing of the house you thought you knew.
Oh, I like that. A new wing with all its possibilities.
Right. So we're getting into a chapter from this book called Finding Yourself Again. Not sure if you've come across it.
I have, actually. It's one of those books that manages to be both comforting and a little challenging at the same time.
Totally. And it does a great job of blending these historical anecdotes with really practical advice.
Which I always appreciate. Gets you thinking, but also gives you somewhere to start.
Exactly. So speaking of anecdotes, the book opens with this story of Isabel, who's living in a coastal town, I think it was back in the 1790s. Picture, like dramatic cliffs, ever-present sea fog.
Okay, yeah, I can see it, setting the scene.
And Isabel, tragically, she loses her husband at sea.
It's interesting, though, how the author really captures the feeling of her loss. Because it's not just about her husband's absence, right? It's the silence that descends on her life afterward. The empty house, the fog kind of muffling everything. Isabel is really forced to confront this immense solitude.
And the book mentions this detail, which I found so fascinating to cope. Isabel starts writing letters. But get this, letters to the ocean. Actual letters she would toss into the waves.
Wow. It's such a powerful image, isn't it? The vastness of the ocean, this force that we can't control, it almost becomes her confidant. And, there's a universality to Isabel's experience. When we experience loss, it creates this vacuum. And in that space, many of us start to hear our own inner voice differently. It's like those everyday distractions fade away and we can finally hear ourselves think.
This idea of finding strength in solitude is something the book explores more, but through a different lens. It compares the process of finding yourself to sifting through an old attic.
Oh, I love that analogy. It's so evocative, full of these forgotten treasures and dusty boxes. You go in expecting cobwebs, but you might find that old guitar or a box of stories you started writing and forgot about, things you didn't even know you were looking for, but suddenly they spark this joy, this sense of, oh, right, this is a part of me.
Yes. And that's how the book reframes this whole idea of self-discovery, It's less about mourning who you were before the loss. It's more about getting excited about who you might find hidden just beneath the surface. Those forgotten passions, those dreams we put on hold, it's all still there, waiting to be rediscovered.
It's like peeling back the layers, when you say, not about becoming someone new, but revealing the person you've always been, just maybe a little dusty from neglect.
Right, like we add on to our lives, new job, new relationship, maybe we move to a new city, and somewhere along the way, we forget about that room we built into the foundation.
Yeah.
The one that holds all those things that really make us pick.
And now's the time to unlock that door, dust off the furniture. It's interesting, the chapter really focuses on the importance of self-love here.
Okay, yeah. Self-love. It feels like one of those terms that gets tossed around a lot these days, almost to the point where it loses its meaning. So how does the book approach it, especially in this context of finding yourself again?
Well, it stresses that self-love is especially important before we try to seek out new connections, especially after we've gone through a loss. It's so easy to fall into that trap of looking for external validation to fill the void.
To kind of make us feel whole again.
Exactly. But real, lasting growth, the kind that sticks with us, it has to come from within.
So it's like setting a new standard, not for other people, but for how we treat ourselves.
Yes. And, think back to Isabel. In her solitude, she wasn't frantically searching for someone else to make her feel less alone. She found a kind of solace, a self-discovery by being with herself, which I'm sure wasn't always easy, but she came out of that period with a much deeper understanding of who she was.
And that, in turn, allowed her to connect with other people from this place of wholeness, not neediness. I like that.
Exactly. And to help cultivate that kind of self-love, the chapter actually gives a really practical exercise. They call it the love letter to yourself. Have you ever tried anything like that?
I haven't, but it's one of those things I've always been curious about. What does it actually look like in practice?
It's so simple. You just carve out some time for yourself, No distractions, maybe with a cup of tea, a cozy blanket. You get a pen and paper and you write a letter. But not just any letter. This one is filled with compassion and understanding. It's about acknowledging your journey, your struggles, your resilience, all the things that make you, you.
So it's kind of like being your own best friend, giving yourself that pep talk you might give someone you care about.
Exactly. You highlight your strengths, the things you love about yourself, even the things you might normally downplay or try to hide, those quirks, the talents that make you unique. It can be a really powerful way to shift your perspective, especially if you're prone to being self-critical.
I love that. To be your own biggest cheerleader. I think that's a really powerful image. But this is where I think a lot of us, we hit a bit of a roadblock, right? We get inspired, we're ready to make a change, but that how-to part trips us up. And thankfully, the book doesn't leave us hanging. It goes on to give some actual guidance on how we can cultivate this self-love. And it all comes back to mindfulness.
Yeah, absolutely. It talks about actually incorporating mindfulness practices into our daily routines. Things like morning reflection, affirmations, even just spending time in nature, practicing gratitude. You know, those techniques we've all heard about. But I think what's interesting is how the book specifically links them back to this journey of self-discovery.
So it's not just about adding another thing to our to-do list, like, okay, gotta meditate for 10 minutes. It's more about how these practices can actually shift our whole perspective.
Exactly. Take something like morning reflection. Instead of waking up and immediately grabbing our phones, checking emails, looking at the news, we take even a few minutes just to be, to check in with ourselves. Like, what do I actually need today? And really listening to what comes up. It's about that reconnection with our own intuition, that inner guide that's so easily drowned out by all the noise of everyday life.
Like hitting the reset button before the day has a chance to pull us in all directions.
Right. Or even something like taking mindful walks in nature. This one really resonates with me. The book talks about how being in nature allows us to reconnect with those natural rhythms of life. You know, those cycles of growth and change that are happening all around us all the time. And it's such a powerful metaphor for what we're talking about here.
It is, because even when we feel lost, maybe after a loss, life keeps going. The sun rises, the seasons change, there are birds singing, and we're a part of that whole cycle too.
Exactly. Just like nature goes through its periods of dormancy and renewal, so do we. It reminds us that even in those quiet moments, when we feel still, there's actually so much potential for growth, for transformation. And, you know, it's not always easy or pretty, but it's often in those moments that we discover our greatest strengths.
So maybe that feeling of being lost, it's not really something to fear. It's more like an invitation.
It is an invitation to really listen to that inner compass, to recalibrate, you know, and rediscover who we are at our core. I love how the chapter ends. It says, when you truly know yourself, love becomes a choice, not a need.
Wow. That's powerful.
It is, isn't it?
It's like we graduate from needing someone to complete us, to choosing to share our already full cup with someone else. It's beautiful. So as we're wrapping up here, what's one small step our listeners could take today to start tapping into that? Even if they haven't gone through a major loss, what's one way they can reconnect with themselves more deeply?
Maybe it is trying that love letter exercise we talked about.
Now,
Or even just taking 5 minutes to sit in stillness, listen to your breath, whatever it is, just approach it with that sense of curiosity, that kindness for yourself, and see what you discover when you give yourself permission to just be. No judgment, no expectation. The answers are already there within us, just waiting to be heard.
I love that. Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with me.
Of course, it's been a pleasure.